Hi everyone, we are going to have a go at something new again. So it's New Year, try something new. I'm going to do a dragonfly today and I'm going to use a little bit of acrylic ink, so that's something new. And I'm going to use a little bit of clean film to create texture. So there's a couple of options there, and I'm using standard watercolour. So just to give you a few pointers on the drawing. So if you start with the head of the dragonfly and then you want a torpedo shaped body, each wing, these wings this side, because it's closer to you, are bigger. These ones are smaller. Then I've got 3 bulrushes. It often works better in odds, so I've popped 3 on there. Again, quite a torpedo shape. You'll lose these as you're painting, so don't do too much drawing. I'll pop the drawing up big on screen so you can screenshot that and print that out if you want to. And then I shall talk you through the colours as we go. So I've got Saunders Waterford paper. It's a cotton paper, £140 in a rough. It's all really that I use on a day-to-day basis, and it stays wet for a nice amount of time, and it's a good hard wearing paper. I'll talk you through these colours. So I've just popped in about half a teaspoon of water into a pea-sized blob of paint with my wash brush. And the first one that I have got is a yellow. So this is cadmium yellow pale. I'm just using up a few paints that I have. If you don't have these colours, just choose something that will work in a yellow. So you can see here that's nice, a nice lemon yellow would work as well. Always start mixing your yellow first, rinse my brush out. I'm mixing up some rose madder. Permanent rose, a little bit of cadmium red would probably work, alizarin crimson would be better. Cadmium red might make it a little bit muddy. This one is called turquoise. This is a common colour called turquoise. Any sort of phthalo blue pigment would work. So Prussian blue would be one, intense blue, Windsor blue. There's lots of different ones. This here is Viridian green, and I've popped in a bit of burnt umber. So I need a nice natural dark green. So I'm just using up some of that, so you can see any brown into a green, and it gives it a really nice natural look. So give my brush a good rinse, because I'm going to start with the yellow. I've got this bit of kitchen towel here just to dab off onto. Okay, so I'm going to wet the whole paper. Not concerned about the dragonfly. I'm going to show you some fantastic things with ink and how to work with them and what I recommend. You'll see how these work. So plenty of water on the paper. With ink you need a little bit more time, so a little bit more water is beneficial. In fact, even an odd puddle can work. So I'm just making sure I go over it twice. I've got plenty of moisture on there. So I'm going to start with my yellow. The yellow is going to come into the top section. It can come over the dragonfly. I'm not concerned at all about what's happening where. This is my round number 10 that I'm using. I'm just very quickly getting the base in here. Not even any particular stroke is happening with this yellow. It's just covering it nice and quickly. Rinse my brush out, dab it off. I'm going to come into the rose madder. I just want a little bit of that coming through. So now I'm thinking in a upward growing out from these bulrushes stroke. I'm going to come up this side, leave it nice and pale up this top section, I'm going to load the brush up and hit the brush on the side of my hand so I get some random splatter in there as well. I'm going to come in with the turquoise. So I've rinsed my brush out in between. You need to move nice and quickly with this layer and not overthink it. It will create a lovely subtle effect. In fact, I'm going to do some blue splatters as well. So load my brush up, hold my hand, do a little splatter. Not too many of the blue. I'm going to take a tiny bit of the green in, but I'm going to keep this quite low at this stage. This is all going to give a nice soft effect. No splatters of the green. So I've got a couple of colours that I'm going to add in with the ink. So this is called Birdwing Copper. Give it a good shake. And I'm going to pipette. Well, I gently squeeze on the pipette, basically. I'm just going to add a little bit in places. So I'm thinking where the bulrushes are. This is a pearlescent ink, so it has a really nice shiny effect. This one is Sepia, so this is one of the ones that I absolutely recommend that you get. So I'm just going to dot a few bits in down here. It's nice and bold, and then I'm going to bring a little bit in where the bulrushes are. I don't want it to go over my Dragonfly, so I am being a bit careful as to where this is going. Don't mind it going over the wings. Do mind it going over the Dragonfly's body. With around number 6, I'm just making sure it's damp. I'm just going to manipulate that sepia ink a little bit so that I start to get the bulrush shape in a bit better. So it's coming all the way up here. This is a nice big bulrush. Again, as I said, I don't mind coming over the actual wings. It's the body that I don't want to hit on the Dragonfly. So you've got very little time with this ink. It just starts to settle, but you can see these beautiful things happening. And then I'm going to get a little bit of clean film. Clean films fall into bits. And I want to place the clean film over the bottom section, so I need a couple of bits. Wherever I'm placing it and it's scrunched up, you're going to get a textured effect, and then we're going to work with that texture. Come in this way as well. Battling with the clean film today. Take it out of the box. Just want one more bit up at this top section here. And then you're going to leave that to dry and not touch it. And we'll come back after this is dry. Okay, so you're going to leave it for about 10-15 minutes, and then you very carefully peel off. And what you should start to see is some texture, and it's just getting it at the right point. If you peel and it runs, then that's too wet and you need to put it back. But if you peel and you can see the texture, it's often best to take it off and then hair dryer it so you can get on with your painting. So I'm going to pull mine off and then I'll give it a blast. Okay, so that's nicely dry and we've got some really lovely texture and randomness. The ink, the iridescent sort of pearlescent ones give a lovely sheen, and the sepia, it splits out into such lovely colours. All of this is going to work really well, and then we've got this really subtle quiet space this side. So we're going to start to come on to the Dragonfly now. And what I want to do is just talk to you a little bit about these inks and what I recommend. So from a perspective of there's two colours that I recommend you having if you're going to try them. These are Daler Rowney FW inks. The first is white pearlescent. So the reason that I recommend this one is because this can be mixed with watercolour to make any other colour that you want. So it works really nicely. So where I've used this Birdwing copper in the background, it's a lovely colour, and that's really just for my ease, because I could mix something quite coppery or orangey, some burnt sienna, into the pearlescent ink, the white, and it would still work as well. The other colour that I recommend is Sepia. It's not as dark as black, it's not as dulling as black, and it has beautiful split out effects. What you do have to remember with all of these acrylic inks is it is acrylic, so once it's dry it's on there, so you need to make sure you keep your brushes nice and clean and you wipe it off your palette when you're finished. Okay, so I've squirted out some of the pearlescent onto my palette and I've squirted out a little bit of the sepia. I'm going to come into the body of the Dragonfly. And I'm going to use a combination of the pearlescent and the colours that I've used in the background. So this is a turquoise coming on. I'm using my round number 6. I've wet the body first. I just want to get a really nice edge. It doesn't have to be so precise. It will stand as a dragonfly. Even if I just left it at that, you'd see it as a dragonfly. So I've rinsed my brush. I'm going to dab into the pearlescent ink, and the pearlescent is just going to give it a lovely sheen. So I'm mixing on the paper the turquoise and this together, but you can mix it in the palette as well and come on in the palette. Just means you can leave little bits lighter than others. The pearlescent ink, all the inks are opaque, so it gives a nice boldness to the depth of the watercolour. And I'm going to touch in with a little bit of sepia, not a lot, just on the underside. This is the sepia ink. I've taken a tiny bit on my brush. I'm just touching in. You can't use acrylic. Rinse my brush off and just blend it through. So I've dabbed it off and I'm blending through. You can't use acrylic in the same way. It doesn't flow in the same way as the acrylic inks do. So I'm just blending that in a little bit down there. I'm going to swap to my round number 10 and just leave that to settle a little bit. I'm going to come in and do some bulrushy grasses. So I'm twizzling round just because I find it easier to paint to a point this way. I'm going to start to just pop a few on. You can overlap, So I'm pressing down fairly hard to start with and lifting off. So I'm getting a nice random, every stroke is different. And there's like a little flick at the end. You don't want to eliminate all the beautiful texture you've got there already. So it's just about creating something that works with it. So I'm bringing it in a little bit this side. Let's have a look at how that's looking. If I take a dab of that turquoise into what's left of the green, so I've just got a slightly bluer mix. I'm going to come down to around number 6. Twizzle around again. So to keep twizzling and looking at what you're creating. That's not blue enough. Take a bit more blue in. Just going to pop in a few with a different colour now. So this now with my round number 6, same action. It's just thinner. All of these bits of the copper will look like you've got the bulrushes in the distance. Now I'm going to take a little bit of the yellow, so I'm just going to keep using the colours that I have now and the turquoise. And then I'm going to swap down to a thinner brush again. This one is a rigger, so this is nice and thin. I'm going to come in and create a few thinner ones, so we're just building a bit of variety here. I'm sticking really to the textured areas, so then building upon those, and we've still got this nice quiet space. A little look how that's building up, that's looking lovely. So at this point you could decide that you wanted to put some more detail into the bulrushes, but actually I'm looking at this, they hold together really nicely just within that background without needing anything else on them. The way that the ink has formed on the picture is just enough. So it's knowing when to not do something as well as when to do something. And this is one of those times where actually you can just leave them and they work really nicely. So this is a little bit more of a yellow coming through. Still with a little bit of that turquoise blue on. Different directions. I'm just trying to build up what I think is pleasing to my eye. It's a hard thing to teach, but it's a balance that you like. So if an area doesn't look quite right, you add a bit more. If there's a bit you don't like, you always try and fix it. This one's a little bit scratchy here. Scratchy is when it's drier. So if I do this, and it's formed drier as I've come through, so I'm just coming back over it to make it less scratchy. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's nicely dry, and what I want to do now is try and put a little bit of detail into the dragonfly's body. So I'm just coming over the top, because I've not got a huge amount of ink in here. This should still gel quite well with a little bit of the turquoise watercolour using my rigger. And I'm just starting to make, just arching to get some little bits of indentations within the body. I'll pop some shadow down this side. So that same colour is just coating over, just creating a little bit of, giving it more of a 3D form, because I'm getting the light and dark element. So there's an element of the light coming this way now. So if I go wing by wing, I'm going to start with these two this side. So this is around number 6. I'm going to wet each wing. So I'm going to do 2 at a time, but you can do 1 at a time. It's absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do is bring in the pearlescent white ink. A nice thin layer. And it's going to give the effect of a wing. And even so much so as that teasel will start to very slightly disappear. Bulrush will very slightly disappear where those wings are. This gives a really lovely subtle sheen. I'm going to dip into a little bit of the turquoise. Just bring a little bit of that in to the edge of the wing. Rinse my brush. So I didn't rinse my brush in between there. There was a little bit of ink still on the brush. And I'm just going to blend that through with a damp brush. If something looks too strong, then you can often, with a damp brush, just manipulate it through to work. Not a wet brush. A wet brush will always watermark a picture, but a damp brush will manipulate it to make it work. I'm going to wet these wings this side. Follow the same process. 1 at a time if you're not quick. Because I'm quick, I can do 2 at a time. Make sure you're coming all the way up to the body. And you're touching into the body on this side. So you can see that the bodies should be underneath the wing, because the wing's towards the top. You can see it touching in. Connecting that wing. I'll pop links for these inks, if I can find them, on Amazon for you. You can get full sets of 6 inks. I don't necessarily recommend buying those. I did buy them originally, but there's colours that I've never used. So unless they're on a good deal, you're better to buy them individually and just use the colours that actually work really well. So I'm just blending in that turquoise again, just making sure that that's coming into the body. So it wants to come into the centre of that body so that they're joined really nicely. If I pick up my rigger and a little bit of the sepia, I'm going to dab it off. What I need to do now is just touch in to the top of the wing. I start to get a little bit of fine detail in here. Now, I don't necessarily mind if this isn't quite dry, because it will still work quite nicely. It's a real test of brush control now. But these little bits, you can do it with a fine liner as well. A drawing pen, if you've got a drawing pen. It's just these little bits make all the difference. It's just mainly the top of the wing. Dab off if you're worried. Just take a little bit on at a time. It's actually quite nice if it flows a little bit. It won't flow as far in the ink anyway. You were not outlining it. You're just putting a few little bits of detail in. Do not outline. You see how those are coming together? It's working really nicely. Tends to be a little bit darker at the very ends. Just take a little bit more into those. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's nicely dry, and we've got to pop some legs in. So we're going to come from the centre of the body. It might come through under the wing, so I'm just going to pop a little bit over the wing. And then if I get a bit of kitchen towel and just dab off lightly on the wing, what I'm hoping is that's just going to be enough. Rub it a little bit with a brush, that it looks like it's underneath the wing, it's lighter. I don't want it to be. If it doesn't work that way, it is working. You can take a little bit more of the pearlescent ink just over those bits so that it looks like you can see it very slightly underneath. Just really, really subtle. Okay, so I'm nearly finished. I'm just going to add a little bit more random. And I'm going to do that with a bit of the Birdwing copper ink. If you haven't got the Birdwing copper, you can make a colour up with the pearlescent white and some burnt sienna. You could just use the pearlescent white if you wanted to as well. I might even use a little bit of the pearlescent white. I'm going to pop a little bit of that Birdwing copper there, and I've got a palette knife. There's lots of different ways you can do this. I find the palette knife just gives it a little bit more of a speckled effect, so the throwing of the paint where you're hitting your finger, it tends to throw it more that way. Sometimes I'll use a toothbrush, that gives a very fine mist. The palette knife gives an in-between. So what I'm going to do is paint some of this onto the palette knife, turn it upside down, come really close and flick. Because I don't necessarily want it all over my Dragonfly. What I want is some texture to happen towards the bottom end. So this just gives it that little bit. And it's very controlled as to where it's going. So it's quite nice to have some bits on dark areas. I use a bit of this white as well. Don't like to waste paint or ink. So we're just flicking this on. So I'm getting a nice random effect. If I take a tiny bit of that turquoise in, I've got a turquoise pearlescent splatter. So I'm keeping within the palette. The colours in the palette I'm still using. And that gives a really nice synergy. You can see how that ink's working. Just that using that white and the turquoise, I've got a new colour. You don't need to have all the different colours to do it. Make sure you give your brush a good rinse. Make sure you give your palette knife a good rinse. I wouldn't use your best sable brushes. If you've got best sable brushes with acrylic ink, I'd save those for watercolour. I just tend to wipe out the palette. Sometimes I forget. I've got a whole video on how to get acrylic ink off palettes as well. I've worked out over the time. So I'm just taking that out and off there straight away. So that's gone now. That's into the kitchen towel. Everything's cleaned off. So that's how easy it is to use that. So I'll find a mount and dry that off. And there we go. So it's all mounted for you. I have just added a tiny bit of the turquoise just onto this teasel, so you've got a sense of shadow from the Dragonfly. But yeah, it's all mounted, looks really lovely. It's a really nice combination of random inks and watercolour. It gives a really nice depth and glow. It shows you how you can create easily something like a dragonfly with the iridescent wings. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do like, subscribe and share. I'll pop you a playlist here and another link for another video just here, and I'll see you next time.